this time we're going to take something off the top ranked stuff over on the BGG list. Yeah, I'm still paying attention to that, even though, and I'll still maintain it in the sense of deleting things. Siege of Jerusalem. Lots of people threw votes, thumbs, money at me for this one. Well, fake money, but whatever. It has some material value. It can be sold, which I probably should do. Okay, so this is a game covering the siege of Jerusalem during the Jewish revolt. In what? Do we have a year for it? 67 AD, somewhere around there. Oh, I don't know. I don't have the information easily available. Maybe it's on the box cover. I think it would be. I can't remember. And I've been warned about this as to the rules being somewhat difficult. I found them fairly readable, at least until I got to the interface type stuff, and sensible. However, there seem to be a lot of little special cases, and I'm going to have trouble remembering those and taking care of them. You'll notice things aren't really set up. That's because if we look over here at the player aid for the full campaign game, and of course I'm doing that, the setup for the game involves several steps before pieces get laid on the table. And it took me a little while to figure that out, that this is treated just like any other assault interface, basically. So the game begins with the Romans able to do engineering and stuff like that. However, they start with their full legionary strength in play. All their units pretty much are here. The counters that you see here are for the little tortoise formations, just to mark those when they're on the play. Let's see, other counters that we have here. Breach markers for damage I'm able to do to the walls. Most of the damage is going to come either through engineering operations or through the siege engines during an assault. Unlike some of the other siege games that we have, there isn't really any huge trebuchets or anything like that knocking the walls down. You do have catapults and onagers, but they're fairly small sized and can't really knock the walls down. The walls are going to be knocked down really by these siege tower items, and none of these start the game actually. So I have these somewhere else. Okay. And let's see what else we have here. Values on the counters. Lots and lots of information to try to represent them. The basic, there are many different types of units. The basic melee strength is over here, the kind of bottommost position. The movement allowance is the next number here, the 6 on this unit. Over here is the ID of the command, over to the left here. Excuse my zooming in and out, but it won't stay in place. The number over here, the 2, is the attack range for missiles. Now this does not look like a missile unit to me, so I don't know why it has one. Maybe it's not what I think it is. What is that? That's a 2.6, one of these. It doesn't have a white stripe though. Maybe it should. The missiles on those units is really just dropping rocks over the walls. And the zealots over here also have that capability. Other units, say the bowmen, which if we can find one over here, have a primary and secondary missile range, and they've got a little white band to indicate that they're really missile capable units. And that actually has an effect for rallying. Rock throwers don't affect rallying, whereas the real missile units do. Let's see if we have anything else. We have leaders. See if we can find their values here. Okay. So this is a headquarters unit over here, and it's going to have a melee strength actually, and a movement allowance. And I thought they had a command rating. On the back of units, if they take a hit, not him, they have a rally number. You can see in a little square there, and that's going to be their chance of rallying. Units are divided into commands, which are indicated by the color striping. This is something that people were already doing before this, I think, but it's a fairly early example of that from my point of view. The siege engines have a breach attack factor and a movement allowance. The breach attack, I think, is their chance of cracking through the force. I don't think this is melee strength. I really do not, but like I remember there being a command factor there, but that may just be the movement allowance. That is the command radius. We have some little markers for morale consideration. These are for the Tessutos when they're broken. And this is for wrecked siege equipment. And we got a bigger one for wrecked siege towers. Over here we have escarpment or escalades, which are going to indicate attacks using ladders up on the walls. And then the Romans have the possibility to build a ramp once in the game, which they'll just shore up against the wall. What do you need for victory? Yeah, good question. Essentially, the Romans need to capture a certain amount of the city within a certain amount of time without taking too many losses and without triggering any terrible external events that would call off the siege. They have to do it fairly quickly. From what I've understood from what other people have told me, the game is unbalanced in favor of the Romans, though, so it shouldn't be too big a deal. We have a terrain key here, which shows the different types of walls, bridges, different types of special elevated hexes, the fortresses, forts, and bastions, which are going to be made more visible with those big, ugly, colored sections on them. I don't know. I'm blowing both ways on that. It's going to make it a lot easier to see what's going on to have those in there, but they do kind of damage a pretty looking map otherwise. We have edifices, which I think certainly include these. They're basically going to be the dark shaded buildings. Those are going to be major buildings, and they're going to have some special effects. And then we have built up areas, which are just heavily densely populated areas that make it difficult for military units to maneuver within them. This is going to be, street door-to-door fighting in this game, but taken at a higher level. It's not at a squad level type situation, right? You got your clear roads. The roads outside of Jerusalem have all been destroyed by the Israelites. We have some slopes over here and up here, which have some effects we'll talk about. Crests are where a slope doesn't kind of overfill, I think. I'll have to look at the rules for that, but basically they cause an additional problem, and I think in most cases the slopes look like they turn into crests. Basically it's if there's no overspill. So maybe these are slopes. I don't know. See, the crest looks darker, and quite often terrain keys don't work for me. This one's not working. Then there's special gate sections, which look like this, and I'm looking to see if I can find one. I would assume that they'd be near the roadways. This is really my first time looking at the map with any serious endeavor. I cannot see a single example of a gate unless these are gates and they look completely different from how they're expressed here. I mean, I would expect there to be gates visible, and the only thing that I see that looks kind of like them is these things with things sticking out, but I don't think that's that. There's sort of an interior chunking, and I do not see an example of what I view as the gate, which is this little line here. That looks like the gate to me. That looks like what I'd call the gate. It's what's important is this washing coming out of it. They're not really showing the whole gate. They're just saying there's a gate because there's kind of wash coming out. That's going to be really hard to see. And no shock, you know, this map is not designed for ultimate readability, except for these big color blobs. Avalon Hill tends to be iffy on their maps anyway. As with most things they do. They didn't have Simonson. Yeah. Alright. So, during the tactical assaults that are going on, that's what most of the play is going to be. And that's what a lot of the effort in writing the rules went into. And to tell you the truth, that stuff is easier to digest. So you're going to have a sequence of play, starting with a Roman turn normally, which is going to go with a rally phase. They must attempt to rally all their disrupted non-artillery units. They don't have to rally their artillery, because the way artillery actually works is the backside of it. There's an artillery piece. This is a ballista. It may not look like what you're used to with a ballista. The Romans had some really huge ballistae, which are the ones that are marked as this. The backside has a rally version on it. This means the unit is movable. And so if you want to keep your units mobile, you don't have to rally them. But with all your other units, you have to try to rally them, and there's some possible negative consequences to that, I guess. I'm not sure. I didn't see any, but I haven't been zoning out on the charts. There's a whole bunch of charts and tables. And if we look at the... if we can find the rally table... here, there may be an effect for units... Yeah, see, there's an effect for units that are not in as good a shape. But anyway, the rally is done across the board, and you can't jump units and try to improve your rally situation. You have to kind of do them sequentially, with the one exception that all headquarters get rallied first. Because I guess they have an effect if they're in good condition or something. Who knows? Then we hit the fire phase, where the non-phasing player is allowed to shoot at the enemy units using the missile table. And then, let's see, the Romans use fresh manned rams to attack elevated hexes using the breach table, and the Romans get to fire back. So both sides get to fire, with first fire going to the defender. The missile table is over here. It's going to be based on the terrain of the target hex, and the total number of factors is added up compared to that terrain type and gives you a column that you roll on. There'll be a lot of modifiers here due to, you know, all kind of special conditions like indirect fire and stuff like that. This attack multipliers here is if you go off the edge of the table, you get to get +1 column shifts for each multiple that you reach of that. And basically you can you in fact must combine all your firepower together on a given hex. If you choose to fire with less than maybe can reach it, you can't then choose to add more in later for another die roll or anything like that. Then the Romans are allowed to move. We'll get into movement a little bit. There's some complexity to that. But we focus on, again, this huge terrain effects chart with all kind of different terrains, all kind of different weaponry types. or all type of different attack types of units, whatever you want to call them. The stacking value, the number of units that can stack in that hex, and then some modifiers, whether or not you can melee attack, what kind of effect there is there, any kind of effect on the defender that's present there as well. And then a whole bunch of notes to the terrain effects chart. It's usually hard to do a siege because the terrain is something you have to really express. It's much more complex than in most situations. And we're not going to worry too much about describing all those terrain effects during this intro. But, you know, the obvious, right? Walls, you can't just attack up a wall. You're going to have to use ladders to get up there. But you might be able to bust your way through in certain places. There are staircases and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I don't see staircases marked here. I think they're just considered inside as a part of the thing. I know that there are counters that you use to represent staircases. The Romans can put temporary staircases, or maybe it's the Jews. I'm not sure which. Obviously, I don't have a great grasp on it right now. But I have read through it, and I've read through it before, long ago. Not all that long. This is a funny game in terms of my history with it. I had one opportunity to buy it back when I picked up The Art of Siege. The guy who owned that place, the store that I got that from, and I paid full price. I paid like $60 for Art of Siege, which to him was shocking because I didn't pay that kind of money for anything. I paid it because it was an SPI soapbox of something interesting to me. He managed to get a copy of this and tried to sell this to me, and I was like, you know, I'm just not that interested. I have the Sieges I wanted. But nowadays, and with some people pointing towards this, they said, oh, this is a cool game. It's just the rolls are a little hefty. Yeah, maybe. This does have some interesting aspects, which is that you have these multiple assault periods. So it kind of reminds me of a game that I never played very much of, that I really liked the concept of, something called Valkenburg's Castle. It was an old Task Force Games game. Fantasy-based, you're trying to siege a castle. Well, you're trying to launch assault after assault on a castle. And they're kind of done with secrecy. It's sort of a dungeon exploration type thing, but this kind of has some of that same flavor where you get to recover and gather things together. And also Siege of Constantinople does, but Siege of Constantinople has sort of this standard, you know, do you take an assault turn or do you take a bombardment turn? This game doesn't do that. It abstracts away the turns where you're not actually doing the assault. I don't know. It probably works fine for this just because other than tunneling, the Romans don't have much they can do to the walls without moving right up into range. Let's see. Then we hit the Roman melee phase, and Roman units can attack on the melee table. Now, it makes sense to me. The missile table is just going to cause damage to the defender. The melee table's the same way. If you don't want to do a melee, that's fine, because, well, it can only help you. That's a little weird to me, but all the results are really results against the defender. And what you do is you get this, you do it with a simple odds table, but there's modifiers to strength, etc. by how you're positioned. So if you're attacking, you know, up ladders on a wall, the defender's doubled in that case, and there's a penalty for trying to hit him. And I don't know if that's all covered on here. It's going to be a tricky situation. Oh, here it is, the Escalade. So the attacker's halved. He's essentially going to be attacking into a bastion or a wall or something. So that's doubled with a -1 with an asterisk. I wonder what that asterisk means. That asterisk means the -1 doesn't happen if you're attacking on the same level. I know what it means. Here it is. I just don't know how to find it on a chart that's labeled with letters, but there it is at the bottom somewhere. So yes, reading and grokking this fully is going to be a major effect to it. But reason is going to designate what or determine what I do in terms of my play, and then I try to figure out how the system accounts for it. I think that'll work better for this than, say, something like Musket and Pike, where some of the mechanisms are a little bit more obscured from the thinking, and certainly easier than any kind of Euro-type game where the mechanisms may be completely divorced from reality. Okay, and then we come to a Judean turn, which is essentially the same. There are some small differences. They're not going to be using siege weapons against the walls. They don't have those type of weapons. And then we go to the time record chart and we keep going. And the turns, there's going to be 7 turns in an assault. And then the last 3 turns are night turns. The Romans have the opportunity to extend those under certain circumstances. If both players agree to stop the assault, it'll stop. Otherwise, the Romans basically have the ability to push the assault onward. There are some vague exceptions. Well, not exactly exceptions, but the Jews can basically abandon an area to the Romans. Once the Romans capture an area, at the end of the assault phase, during the in-between interphases or whatever, they kind of level all the built-up stuff in it, but they don't level the edifices. That's important because they're getting rid of the population there. They're making sure that it's not just a hotbed of disaster for them while they try to work their way inward. The game has command control. Let's see. So its command control range is reduced by 2 hexes. But they don't tell me what the command control range is. When I look at the leaders, there is no command control range on the leaders. They have a melee strength. I don't think that's correct, but I'm not sure because the range seems so low. So let's keep looking. Command control is determined at the beginning of each phase, but see 11.9. A unit which begins the current phase in command control is not penalized. So I had assumed it was the number on there, but I'm not so sure it is. And I'm not sure how I'm going to find that out. I guess the leaders are just kick-ass at fighting, and they'd actually have no command control rating on them. Yeah, I don't know. This is Avalon Hill, so it could well be screwed up in many ways. Example: a Jordanian unit flanked by. Yeah, this doesn't help. It doesn't tell me what the command control. Leaders. Leaders only control units of their own legion or faction. They're color band. There are overall commanders that are heavier. But they don't, again, give a range of command control. 10 hexes. 10 hexes of a headquarters. And when the headquarters is wounded, does it go down to 8 on here? Yes, it does. Okay, so I guess they indeed have a humongous melee capability for the leader counters themselves, which is weird because they kind of don't have a stacking capability. We'll see if that melee capability is stronger than you'd think. Or is melee something that I totally missed? Is there like single combat or something in this game? Because if we look here... No, they're called melee strength here too. Okay. Yeah, I had some worry. So yeah, I guess the leaders have a tremendous capability. We'll see if that's limited by the units that they're stacked with. I don't remember that being the case. The commanders, there are 4 of them, Titus Gallus, Tiberius Alexander, and Eleazar ben Yair, can control any unit of their side. And leaders don't have to trace a line of communication back to their commander. So what happens if you're not in communication? You can't enter an enemy zone of control. You can't move next to an enemy unit that's occupying an elevated hex. There wouldn't be a zone of control here, but you can't move up with the hope of, say, laying a ladder down there or something. They can leave an enemy zone of control only if they don't enter another one. If they're already adjacent to an enemy, they can melee. And they can advance after combat into the zone of control of another enemy. During the fire phase, units out of command control can attack only adjacent units. And units out of command control cannot place escalades or assemble or disassemble testudo and are subject to unfavorable DRM during rally phase. They defend normally. Stacking. All right. Stacking is based on the terrain effects chart. And I believe this is, let's see what that @ sign says. Stacking limits are normally not applicable to artillery, siege engines, and headquarters. But only one of each unit of these units can exist in a hex. One artillery can occupy a fortress hex along with a cauldron. Cauldron are sort of artillery that the Jews have. They have a big pile of them. They're just basically pots of boiling oil and crap that they throw down. So, in general, you'll see the Romans in the clear can have 3 infantry or cavalry stacked together. The Jews a little bit less here. But once you get into the fortresses, the Israelis have stronger, or Israelites have stronger stacking capabilities. We have a W here, which might mean something. Judean occupation of a siege engine hex wrecks the siege engine. Okay. When you're stacked with actual siege engines, if you're Romans, you can be stacked either below or on top of the siege engine, riding it. If you're stacked below, you can be pushing it. That's up to 2 infantry and or veletae. And they can't move unless somebody's pushing it. And then all kind of limits. They can't enter an elevated hex except when a ram passes through a gate. So let's find a gate here somewhere again. I can't fucking see them. You'd think there'd be one. There's a road here. There should be a gate, right? Doesn't look like it there. Maybe they've just disappeared on me. Okay. Well, there's a gate here. Okay. So, and you can see how, I mean, I can't tell. I can barely see this. But anyway, there's a gate here, which means that I could actually move into this hex, but I got to keep moving out of it if I've got like a siege engine or something that's moving through a gate that I am allowed to move through. There's a lot of weird shit like that in this. Rams have to have a fresh pushing unit of the same legion to be able to attack a wall. Siege towers has to be the same legion as the tower to push it. I think that's the general case. You have to be the same legion, yeah. Armored towers, though, I've got a pile of those somewhere here. Those aren't attached to a legion, so any legion can push them. Escalades, a fresh heavy infantry or veletae can raise an escalade marker, and I think they just pull it out of their ass, basically. It's one of these ladders. During the movement phase, it costs them 4 movement points, and then they're a base, and up to 2 units plus a headquarters may be above them on an escalade, scaling the walls. It can't be used more than 2 units, by more than 2 units in a turn, so you gotta kind of keep track of how many units climb up it if there's an open wall that they're able to get up easily. It's gonna cost them, I think, 4 movement points to climb. I'm not sure. I think that's mentioned somewhere else, probably under movement. The testudo is a marker that you put on top of, and they've kind of pictured it with this, which I don't know what the hell that has to do with it. I think that's just an error in the picturing, because that, well, that's a veletae. Veletae can be in a testudo. They're probably trying to show the missile capability. So if you put a testudo, and I can't really figure this out for sure, but if you put a testudo on top of, it's got to be at least 2 or 3 fresh heavy infantry. Cost them 6 movement factors. It'll be like this. This is normally the disrupted side of something, but it doesn't really mean anything else. If there's a veletae, a fresh veletae, right? If there's a Velitai and 2 heavy infantry, they get this marker, which gives the missile capability of the Velitai within the Testudo, which is the same as their capability outside of it. The Testudo is going to give some advantages in defense, I'd presume, especially against missile fire. Probably not against anything else. Some restrictions on the Testudo. They cannot enter a built-up hex, even on a road, and they have 4 movement points, even if units within them are disrupted and have less movement factors on their own. They're able to retain some integrity. If you stack units of different legions or factions, the factions being the color sets for the Israelites. Are they Israelites or are they Judeans? I don't know. Yeah. It's hard to tell because there were 2 countries there at one point, and they keep using Judean here, so I think that's probably correct. So I'm probably screwing it up. But the Roman armored towers can be stacked with either. Yeah, so they're going to take a die roll penalty if units of different legions or factions are together for their defense, and perhaps attack as well. Okay, let's talk about zone of control and take a break. Some units have a zone of control. Fresh infantry or fresh cavalry on ground or built-up hexes, but not elevated hexes, exert a zone of control into all adjacent ground hexes except built-up or edifice hexes. Gates. Fresh infantry occupying a gate exerts a zone of control into all connected elevated hexes and into the 2 adjacent ground hexes connected by entrance hex sides. A connected elevated hex is one which the elevated feature traces through the wall towards. So, I mean, if you're here, this isn't a gate, so screw that. Let's find a gate. You're here. You have a zone here, 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 and here. If you're in an elevated hex, fresh infantry occupying a non-gate elevated hex exert a zone into all connected elevated hexes. They do not exert it between a tower or escalade ramp and any elevated hex, which is the towers are the siege towers, the escalade ramps are the attempts for the Romans to get up the wall that way. How much does that matter? Well, the zone of control basically only affects movement here. Some things don't have zone of control. Disrupted artillery, Romans that are with the artillery or that are with a siege engine or an escalade. Anything in nighttime, units in ground level at zone of control don't exert a zone into an elevated hex and vice versa. And basically it's that they can't interfere with each other's movement. So there's different types of zone of control based on what's going on. Infantry, artillery, and siege engines must stop upon entry of an enemy zone of control, and they can move no further. If they want to leave, they can exit, but not directly from zone of control to zone of control. Cavalry and headquarters, though, have a soft zone of control that affects them. They have to pay 3 extra movement points to leave an enemy zone of control if they're moving through one, or if they're moving at the start of their turn directly from one to another. At the start of their turn, they can exit without paying that penalty, but any other time they enter a zone of control, they have to pay that penalty to pass through. You may not retreat into or through a zone of control in any way. You'll be eliminated if you have no other option. And there we'll take a little break as we go on to the movement phase. So, movement is fairly standard for a war game, but there are all kinds of special rules just because of the nature of the siege. I don't want to go into too many details here. They largely are intuitive. Actually looking up and finding the movement point costs is going to be a pain in the ass, but luckily it looks like there's a significant amount of reference material here for when you're coping with something. And I don't think this is the kind of game where you can grasp everything about it simply by looking through the rules. That you have to kind of get the feel for how it works by playing it, by actually trying to set up the ladders and storm and climb the walls, etc. One thing here, there are some special cases though. Courts, all clear hexes within the temple quarter are court hexes. Well, where is the temple? It's going to be up here. And movement at ground level through the western side of the temple quarter is prevented by the closeness of the walls. I'm assuming that's this. So you're not going to be able to move there, which prevent the passage of troops. I don't know what any of that matters. Court hexes actually do have their own entry here. So we're going to have to worry about them. Do they look terribly different from clear? A little bit better for infantry. I guess it's a paved court that's easier to walk on. Staircase breach. Infantry units can move from ground level to elevated level and vice versa via connected staircase hex side or from a breach. Well, staircase unfortunately isn't on here. And I don't know what the definition of a staircase is. I think maybe the gates have them. MYZ. Yeah, it's not mentioned there. So that's kind of problematic for me. And obviously, there's no index. And if there's a table of contents, which I don't think there is either, it's not going to help with that. So maybe the map section, no, there doesn't seem to be one. Nothing describing the map, huh? Jeez, there has to be, here it is. Components, map sheet, yeah. But I'm looking to see where we have a definition of what a staircase might be. Okay, now there's some errata here that is going to be a pain in the ass that I'm probably not going to be able to deal with. Yeah. So I don't know. We don't have a definition of the staircase here. Maybe it's spelled out somewhere else that I can find. My feeling is that that is the gate hexes or maybe it's these, which we have these little things trailing off, but we don't have a specification that they are staircases. So, you know, maybe there's staircases running from the external part of the city inward here. Maybe there's not. I don't know. Via connected staircase hex side. Okay, well this is not a staircase hex side. That is for certain. This is not a staircase hex side, although it kind of looks like one. Yeah, these kind of look like staircases. These have got to be what they're talking about. So this is the staircase hex side coming across here on the blue. Okay. At a cost of 2 movement factors, so you're able to climb from those locations. Roads inside Jerusalem can be used by both sides until the city's been leveled via the section's been leveled via clearance, and then the roads stop existing in any format, and they'll use the road movement allowance. Only within the city, the ones external, remember I said, have been destroyed. The built-up hexes, where there's a lot of buildings in there, these cost less for the Judeans because they're familiar with the city. Both sides have limited stacking. That's all covered in the terrain effects chart. Cav and artillery cannot enter them except along the roads. And again, those can be leveled and turned clear. Breaches. Artillery, testudos, cavalry, and siege engines may enter a breach only if the breach is adjacent to another connecting breach. Basically, there has to be a big hole in the wall of 2 hexes to be able to cross through with those, with some more difficult to maneuver units. Likewise, we've got a lot of special rules for firepower, for artillery. So archers firing at towers fire at either the top or the bottom, and they only hit one level. Escalades, when you're firing at them, you can only shoot at the unit on top, I believe. Firing through towers causes a penalty because of the line of sight effect. There's a weapons range effect chart, which shows how the different weapons work at different hexes. So you have your primary range. So your missile units can fire 1 to 2 hexes at primary range and an attack factor of 2. Their secondary range is at an attack factor of 1. Some of the heavier artillery units have up to a tertiary range. Rocks only work at a range of 1 or 2. And actually you have to drop them from above the enemy in order to use them. It's possible when you're attacking at a higher elevation with artillery that you might end up dropping your artillery payload, ballista bolts, whatever, into friendly units, and they'll take fire as well. You have to deal with tracing line of sight. This is a fairly complicated section, I think. Looks pretty dense. There's a line of fire determination table over here, which shows, so if I'm firing from a fortress or tower at a fortress, the only thing that could block me is another fortress. But if I'm firing down at something else, other things could block. A fortress, a bastion, which is a smaller fortress, or even a W, a wall or ramp. Now, the wall or ramp, though, only affects if it's at the halfway point or closer to the lower target, or to the lower force. And you have a reciprocal line of sight with that. Because the walls are lower than the fortified elevated hexes. And that's all being covered through this, hopefully fairly effectively. That's a bad idiom to use. There are elevations of ground level distinguished by slopes. You cannot fire at another ground level unit on a different elevation through or into more than one clear hex if the line of fire fires through a slope hex. So if I'm up here, I can't fire down here. And if I'm back here, I can't fire through it at all. That's a little weird. It feels to me like I should be able to fire at the guys further away downward. I'm not sure what that's meant to represent, to tell you the truth. And I think that I may end up discarding that side of the rule and say it only affects if you're trying to see from, say, here down over here, because you've got kind of a flat surface that the city's built on. So you actually do have a layer cake terrain here in a way that you wouldn't in most games. Okay. So rams and armored towers do a firepower attack of a certain type, and we're not sure how that works yet. When they're attacking the walls, we'll see that. Fire concentration, when units are firing together, they have to add their strength together to fire. at the units in a given hex. There are some exceptions to that. You must fire on things that are adjacent to you if they are, so you can't ignore the guy next to you and shoot over his head or off to some other side where somebody's further away. Even if you'd have a chance of hitting one and not the guys who are next to you or something. Units in wall and bridges hexes are easier targets for missile attacks from elevated hexes along the same wall. Basically, the idea being if I'm up here, I can shoot down this wall with greater effectiveness. You don't have many places you can run to, and there's a bonus for that. Indirect fire, if I've got to fire over combat units, over the heads of other units, mine or someone else's, there's a penalty for doing so, but I'm allowed to do it. Maybe not with all weapons, though. Special firepower attacks, armor. The Rams and such not have. That's a dude. I find it very difficult to see these. I'm so used to the more modern counters that have color distinguishment in addition to the picture. If you're going to go with pictures, I think that's good. So I have a little pointer that says, "Hey, this is the hex that I'm attacking here," and I'm having trouble with this damn zoom. And that facing is where I can actually fire to with my RAM. Now, it costs me movement points to change facing. I don't know, 1 or 2 movement points to change facing with those. And let's get him with his Legion. Fresh Zealots, Militia, and Cauldrons in an elevated hex can attack adjacent units in ground hexes. Now, what's strange is that the Rock has like a 2 hex range. Whereas some things only have a 1 hex range. Actually, they have a 1 to 2 hex range here, right? No, they only have a 1 hex range. Yeah, that's adjacent. Never mind. They have 2 attack factors. Okay. So I can drop these things on them using the missile factor table as long as I'm higher than the enemy is the essential rule. So even if I'm in a fortress, I can drop them on the walls. The temple is the highest structure in Jerusalem. The missile units in the central hex of the temple edifice, over here, can direct fire through the surrounding edifice hexes, whether they're vacant or occupied, to any target within range. The temple wall is notwithstanding, so I can shoot over temple walls and such not from way up on top of there. Okay. I'm afraid we're going to work our way through this slowly. Okay, so here we are with melee combat, and again, like the missile fire, melee is pretty straightforward. You are going to be dealing on a straight odds chart. You do some hits that are noted here, like eliminate a unit, disrupt a unit. 2 disruptions ends up in an elimination. Stuff like that. Now the disruption is just a step, not really a step loss, but a reduction to the rear side, which can't combat, can't do offensive combat, and is weaker overall. But there are lots of special cases dealing with who can attack what and what kind of multipliers and factors they have. A lot of it's terrain based. Crests here. Dark brown on one side and clear on the other. Now that's clearly this. Maybe not this, depending on how you want to interpret dark brown, right? I don't know. The terrain key is not sufficient to help. I think maybe this is dark brown on one side and clear on the other, but I see a distinguishment between how this is shown and this. On the other hand, there are perhaps other places where it looks more like a normal slope, like this. The slope is just this darker side. So it's very hard to determine what the map is expressing when you read the rules. But these have their own effect, whatever they may be. If we can find them. Oh, maybe they don't. We got slope ramp. We don't have crest, so crest is defined Y. The melee, the attacker's melee is halved if he's attacking against a defender at ground level on a non-slope hex, which to me seems to be the opposite of what you'd expect. So this is ground level on the non-slope hex, which means, how do they work? Yeah. So the attacker would be reduced coming up the crest. If this is a crest. If this is a crest, that's different. You know, again, I can't tell. What they're intending to do. They don't put different elevation levels in the map. All they're trying to express is through this, and it's not absolutely clear. Towers can melee over to the walls, and vice versa. If you can take out all the forces in a siege engine's hex from the ground level, you can wreck it. But you can't do that successfully, I think, if there's anyone on top of it, like they come down and fight. You can attack the units on the top of the escalade. I think you can attack the ones below too, and then the guys above are able to take casualties. This is all these special cases that probably almost never come up, but they'll probably each come up once in a game or a few times in a game. And I'll have to look them up no matter what at that point. We already discussed the missile table had attack multipliers. What about the melee table? Each odds multiple gets you a die roll modifier in your favor of the correct direction. So if you go down to 1 to 5 here, you'd give a -1 on the track. If you go up to 8 to 1, you get a +1 on the table. If a complete cohort of fresh legionaries, 1-7, 1-6, and 1-5-8, with both the same cohort and legion ID. So these guys actually have 2 numbers on them. The legionary number, and then over to the right here, the cohort number. If those are all together, you get a bonus for having them all together. You get a penalty if you have different factions or legions trying to operate together. But there are some exceptions. I think these are the garrisons, the purple stuff. I'm not sure. It's not really specified where I found it. And then these are the zealots. And they don't, or zealots, they don't actually, they count that they can work with anyone without a penalty. Okay. If you're able to attack where you have somebody surrounded so that by zones of control, impassable hexes, and enemy units, you get a benefit there. The attackers are doubled, and of course the defender's not going to be able to retreat. It's not every situation where the defender can't retreat, though, just the ones laid out there. If you end up with a number of E results greater than the number of defending units, the advancing melee attackers are able to move an additional hex beyond the defender's vacated hex for each E result that didn't eliminate a unit. Okay, things start getting weird here with the continuous combat, and I tried to understand this and I don't think it quite makes sense. Basically, there's these chits. Are these them? Yeah, multiple attack chits that are labeled A, B, and C. And it looks to me like there's some sort of pulsing, like you make your attacks by the counters. The A's then would all get to make additional attacks, but other units can throw in, and it doesn't appear from the rules that there's any distinguishment between an A, B, or C, except that you get them, like an A gets promoted to a B, gets promoted to a C. Let me explain. Whenever all defending units are eliminated or forced to retreat, the attacker can advance. and they get marked with an A multiple attack marker. Zones of control and command control have no effect on the advance. Okay, an unit advancing after combat and electing to multiple attack must melee a unit in its zone of control if such a unit exists. If there are no enemy units in its zone of control, it may melee any adjacent unit it could normally attack. There's no limit to the number of multiple attacks a unit can make in a melee phase. Okay, so it's not the ABC, wrap back around. Provided at least one of the attacking units in each attack has a multiple attack marker, i.e., sounds like you can include other units in the multiple attack. Okay. Whenever an attack not involving at least one unit with a multiple attack marker is resolved, all multiple attack markers must be removed. What? Whenever any attack not involving at least one unit with a multiple attack marker is resolved, all multiple attack markers must be removed. Well, there aren't any. That's what this excluded. I'm going to say it's got to be one involving, but gosh, I don't think that's what they mean. I don't know what they mean. It's senseless. Likewise, whenever any attack involving at least one unit with a B multiple attack marker is resolved, all A multiple attack markers must be removed. I think it's all anywhere. If any attack not involving at least one unit with a multiple attack marker is resolved, all multiple attack markers are removed. I think it's from everywhere on the board, because it doesn't make any sense what they're trying to describe on some localized fashion. Whenever any attack involving at least one unit with a B multiple attack marker is resolved, all A's must be removed. Units which advance after combat as a result of a successful B multiple attack grow a C multiple attack marker. The chain of possible multiple attacks advances and begins anew with A if necessary. I have no idea what this is meant to represent. It's some sort of breakthrough type thing, and I think what it means is when you get the A multiple attack markers, you want to fire them off immediately. Because otherwise you'd be doing something that didn't involve a multiple attack marker and they would get removed. On the other hand, if you choose to do any B's, A's are removed. Now C's have no effect on anything for some unknown reason. They don't affect A's or B. Again, this whole section seems like it was written by somebody who was not trying to be coherent. I, of course, suspect Don Greenwood is being involved in hammering that one out to make sure it was as unintelligible as possible. But that's just me. Okay. He's sort of the constant through the Avalon Hill series of games. And the choices that are made in so many of their rules designs, and the choices that are made in terms of trying to make rules clear, always seem like they were made by someone who was drunk and could barely type. There are just so many flaws in Avalon Hill rules. And they don't touch victory games, which was also, obviously Mark Herman had the oversight there. They don't touch SPI. They don't touch many companies. Avalon Hill seems to have this special capacity for making their rules impossible to read after the classics. The classics had their own problems, but there seems to be this... Anyway, let's keep going, because this is one of my hobby horses, right? Okay, breach damage can happen through mining, which comes a lot later in the interphases, and also through attacks on the breach table. Siege engine attacks, which will be using this, and you add, I don't know what breach factors are, and you roll a die, and you get a number. And I don't know if that was covered somewhere before, but let's keep going, because maybe we'll understand. When it equals or exceeds the breach defense of a hex, which should be here somewhere, except I don't see it. I assumed I would see it here. I've looked for it. It's not explained in the rules what the breach defenses are. Here they are. They have their own little table. Okay, so here's the value you have to exceed. And you have counters that go from small to bigger to make them more apparent once the breaches get nastier and nastier. And then on the other side of these guys, you get to a full breach, which just says, hey, you know, you've busted that wall down. You're able to actually walk through it. Okay, but we still don't know how these are generated. Let's see how this works. When an elevated hex gets breach damage, it gets the number. When the damage is greater than the breach defense, the breach marker's there. Okay. And then we have some special cases involving what happens when you hit like a corner. You basically breach the whole set. Breach attack factors. Well, this RAM, I bet you the one there is its breach attack factor. Let's see. Yeah, that's the breach attack factor. So we can add those up and we'll be attacking on the breach table. And that happens kind of during the firing phase. All right. The missile table, I've already explained this sucker. It's not too complicated. Melee fire combat results, again, a fairly simple. Once you get all the modifiers and strength actions in there, it's fairly simple. Now, when you eliminate artillery or siege weapons, and you can tell this is important because it has a picture, so of course I ignore everything but the picture. You get these wreck markers, and they're going to count against the stacking limits for the hex. Let's keep going a little bit further. What I'd like to do is get through to here, and then we'll take another video for the assault period, which is sort of the framework over the game. Okay, we're in an assault period right now, but they labeled the rules assault periods for the section of the siege warfare that isn't actually assault periods. Whatever. Okay. So, if a defending unit's not in a fortress, testudo, or siege engine, and it's disrupted, it's going to have to retreat. And if it can't retreat, it's going to be eliminated. It can't retreat through a zone of controls. It can't retreat a hex it wouldn't normally be able to enter. And it can't enter a hex with a panicked unit. Stacking limits don't apply during the retreat, but they do cause some penalties, which come up in a moment. But you can't end your hex overstacked. You may be able to join a testudo, however, during your retreat. Each time a unit retreats into or through a fully stacked hex, it's going to get worsely disorganized. If it's a fresh unit, it becomes disrupted. It flips over. But unlike in combat, a disrupted unit doesn't immediately eliminate. Instead, it's going to get the route marker or the panic marker. First, it goes to the route marker. The next time it does it, it gets the panic marker. And then they kind of have to try to run to a safe place until they can rally. The Romans can leave the map, and at the beginning of the next assault period, they'll come back into play. They're not destroyed, but they won't come back on the map during this assault period. The Judean refuge is the temple quarter. If the Romans have that, the Judeans have to reset and make a decision some other section of the city. The sections of the city are outlined by the walls, and the Romans are going to take control of specific chunks of the city and destroy them all at once, basically. So, being disrupted means you can't attack, you can't place ladders, you get a broken testudo marker, which just indicates that you've spent movement points. We're going to have to switch batteries, even though we have only this left. Can't enter a zone of control. They can't fire if they're siege engines. You can voluntarily disrupt a siege engine in order to allow it to move, because they can't move while they're undisrupted. And they don't have a zone of control. I'll be back in a moment. Next is the rally phase, and basically, like I kind of alluded to earlier, you're going to run down the line of all your units and make rolls for everything that's disrupted, and you have to see if it rallies. You must do this. I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to. There's some possible negative effects. Series of modifiers here. Notably, if you're routed or panicked, you have a further penalty. And if you roll high enough, If you roll a 7, you will rout. If you roll a 9 or higher, you're eliminated. Hold on. An 8 panics you. A 9 or higher eliminates the unit. So it's possible you could have so many penalties to you that you wouldn't want to roll, but you must. Effects of rout and panic have additional penalties, not just for the rally table, I think. I think they have other penalties in combat as well. You get to check your headquarters first to see if they succeed. All right, that is the end of the of not a full introduction to the rules, but of the core idea behind the game. And yeah, you know, how much does that sink in? I don't know. I could have done it a lot more abstract and done some hand waving, but I need to understand the rules myself, which is part of why I do these. So I'm obtaining something out of them. The next section of the rules, the remainder, covers the campaign as a whole. It's going to cover how the forces, you know, can interact between major assaults in terms of engineering, in terms of recruiting new troops, in terms of building up their siege weaponry, and also in terms of the control of the city locations. What's strange is some of these rules kind of may have an effect on the tactical level. You're going to worry about them during the tactical game, but I think the tactical scenario doesn't worry about them. I can't really look at that because I've got a ton of counters on top of it right now. They've got 2 scenarios there. There was a general magazine that had other scenarios. I think this one has the first assault on the back of it, and then, you know, which is going to be basically the full boat pretty much anyway. But I think some of the scenarios that came out in the general give you, you know, smaller scenarios to play around with. But I see no point in doing anything but the full campaign, of course. All right, let's send this up. Screw it. There's only a couple of pages left. It's not really enough room for another whole video. Although this one's running long, and this is the least understood area of the game to me. So, an assault period, like I said, lasts 7 daylight turns. And then the Romans have a possibility to push it into the nighttime. At the end of a Judean melee phase, the Judean player can cede control of any city area with Roman units, even if the Roman doesn't have his control requirements. You might want to do this because this is when the decision to end the assault period is going to have to happen. It could also cause the 25% remaining levy capacity, which allows the Judeans to pull out of the city entirely and go do the Masada siege, which causes problems for Rome's victory point levels. All units are going to rally. However, Roman artillery can choose to be disrupted at their option. All breach damage stays in place, but there's a possibility of repairing it, which will be handled over in a later section. If we do go to night turns, fire is limited to 1 hex. Rally has a penalty. Zones of control. Judean units may withdraw from the zone of control of heavy infantry at ground units. At ground level. Command control is reduced. Melee. There's a bonus for the Judeans in melee, and they also get a bonus on their reserve activation die rolls if the fight goes into the night, i.e. it's a tougher fight than it seems like. Now the Judeans don't start with all their pieces on the board. They have a significant number of additional pieces, and that's what that refers to in part. The city is divided into 10 separate sections by the walls, like I said. They each have their own special rules for control. So, for example, the Tyropian city, New City, David City, and upper and lower cities. So say the upper city here as an example. I don't want to point them all out. I don't know them all. The Romans control the area if they have at least 10 fresh heavy infantry inside the area, and they control at least 15 non-edifice built-up hexes. The edifices don't matter. The built-up hexes do. If they control enough of the city, they've taken it. And that will trigger the possibility of, hey, do you want to end it? Along with other things. And then others have their own little area sections. Some of them you have to hold all the fortresses, the fortress triangle. I don't know where the hell these are. Let's see, there's a fortress there, but that's not it. I don't know where the fortress triangle is. But basically, I'd be looking up a section, at any given point as to what do I have to do to resolve that section. I probably won't be worrying too much ahead of time. Yeah, never plan. That's our goal here. Jewish infiltrations through the sewers beneath the cities can't be stopped. That's going to allow repositioning into fortresses that were not captured during the assault. In between, this is, I believe, in between the assault periods. The walls, however, for the Judeans to keep control of a wall, for the Romans to gain control of a wall section, they have to have both sides. So, for example, if I had the Upper and the Tyropian city here, all these wall hexes would become Roman, but the fortresses would remain Judean if there were Judean forces in them. And they could actually be deployed in there, including artillery and such, not just because the Judeans had an underground movement system through the sewers, basically. The Judeans can actually regain control of a section by matching the same control requirements that the Romans had. Except the Judeans can use their light infantry and cleared built-up hexes. Remember, these are all going to be demolished when the Romans take control. And that's the next thing. They're leveled between assault periods. Edifices will not be cleared, however. Staircases. Between assault periods, the Judeans construct new staircases on the exterior entrance hexes of gates between areas they have lost and those they still control. They may also build one temporary staircase from each bastion or fort, which otherwise would have no ground level access. They mark this with an escalade marker. These will remain for the rest of the game, I think. I don't know. Okay. There are garrison troops, which I don't know. They show something kind of pinkish orange here. I think these are the purple pieces because they're the only ones without commanders. The Fortress Triangle, Herod's Palace, the Temple Quarter, and the Yaffo Gate Complex and the Antonina Fortress all have permanent garrisons. Looks like there are not as many as listed. That's going to be a certain number of regulars and zealots. I'm sorry, zealots. I keep doing that. Other Judean forces can enter the garrison area, but the garrisons can't leave their area. And the garrisons are actually marked. So, like, this is the Temple Quarter, this is Temple Quarter, this is HP, Herod's Palace, whatever. The other one's probably the Antonina Fortress. They'll always be in command control within their, as garrison units. They can only be drawn as replacements if their assigned area is still under Judean control. If it's controlled by the Romans, they must occupy a Judean-controlled fortress in that area or be removed permanently from the game at the end of the assault period. The Temple Quarter and Antonina Fortress garrisons share an overlap, which either one can be present in along this wall. Okay, well, we'll have to see how they come in as replacements, etc. Roman combat units eliminated during play are going to count for victory points. We'll see how that's scored. There's basically a little chart here. Okay, we just saw. At the end of the assault period, a certain percentage of their units that were in the dead pile, with the exception of headquarters, will be randomly drawn from a cup or whatever for the next assault period. Now they suggest here, because some of the counters are larger than others, you want to put the big counters, you want to use some kind of fakes for them or something. I'm not quite sure what to use. I can certainly use, if there's not too many of them, I can use the breach counters for them. But at some point or another, I have to maybe make up counters with numbers to put in, and then I have to make sure that they have different glossy factor or whatever. Siege engines. The Romans can remove a ram in a tower and receive an armored tower, or they can go vice versa. Basically, the armored tower is a combination of the two. All headquarters except commanders will be replaced automatically in the next assault period, but they're going to be at a reduced value, and that is going to have to be marked down somehow. The key leaders in the game have specific replacement rules, some of which affect victory fairly heavily. Now, the Judeans get replacement units from their eliminated pile, and they'll be getting a percentage of units from the dead pile equal to the percentage of the city which they still control for levy purposes. In addition to that, they're going to get reserves, which are taken from the yet unplayed units which remain off board. Now, this is weird. So, am I in the assault period or not? I think this is the between assault periods is when I can start drawing these. But it's hard to tell because night turns are covered in here. You know, there's just so much disorganization in this rule book. At the start of the Judean rally phase, okay, now wait a minute. The Judean rally phase doesn't happen during an assault, during the assault interphases. It happens during the rally phase. Of each turn that a Roman unit has occupied or attacked by, so this again seems like we're back in the main section of the rules here. Have occupied or attacked during melee or missile fire at least 2 hexes of the area. It's going to get some reserves. The Judean can roll 1 die per turn for each built-up area containing at least 2 hexes occupied or attacked by melee or missile fire that turn, or 2 dice per turn for each area containing non-edifice built-up hexes with Roman units within, not just on, the elevated hexes of that area. So I'm going to get a bunch of dice, right? Is that what they're saying? I roll 1 die per turn if there was a melee or missile into the built-up area, or 2 dice in an area with non-edifice built-up areas with Romans within the elevated hexes, if they're on the walls and in the fortresses. I'd get 2 dice for that. I roll those dice. That's going to tell me how many units I get. I think use this modifier. I think I add this modifier to the activation total. It's not clear which die roll it's going to be, and I roll to see what type of unit I get. Now I can downgrade the unit if I don't have the correct unit, so regulars can turn into militias, for example. There's a total limit of how many units I can build up out of the reserves, and I don't know that it has any correlation to the number of units in the tray. So basically, what they suggest is that you can just keep a written record of the number of units that have been pulled out of the reserve from there. If there aren't enough units left in the tray to pull from the reserve, you can pull from the dead pile. Of course, that reduces your interphase type replacement points, which I guess happen in the interphase. But this is all muddled together in a crazy sort of way. And the Judeans can kind of be jumped into built-up hexes. As long as they're not in a Roman zone of control, they can kind of appear anywhere. prior to the setup of each of the 2nd through 5th assault periods, the Judean gets all of the uncommitted reserves of the areas which fell to the Romans. So if the Romans take areas, all the people who are there withdraw from it, and they get a huge swath of extra troops. So it doesn't really help the Romans to wipe out areas except for victory points. The siege was conducted during a period of unrest in Rome. There's an external influence table. If the Romans don't have a certain percentage of the city's levy at the beginning of whichever interface we're looking at, they are being pulled out because of a civil war that started because of the failures to do this. The Romans get a 1 time per game chance to build a ramp, and they could do this at the very beginning of the game. It's actually included in the things that are in the interface setup, that with no specification that it can't be done. And the ramp's going to be either 3 or 5 hexes just away up one of the walls. Now, to do this, they have to spend certain number of weeks before they conduct their assault. And this is going to be the heart, this little table of, let me get a copy of it here actually. Wow. Most of these tables aren't in both places, but these guys are. The Romans get to decide a certain number of weeks that they want to take, and they're going to get a certain number of ramps that they can build. They're going to get effects on the mining table for collapsing walls, etc. And again, this is done before the game actually starts even. This is why we're not set up yet. Setup happens down at the bottom of the interface thing. Usually you don't have an interface before the game begins. And these are set up before the Judean artillery is going to be set up. Victory points, the Romans are going to, if they don't lose due to external influences or a mutiny, which we haven't gotten to yet, that comes from too many losses, 400 victory points of losses in one assault. The Judean player can still win by getting 1,500 victory points total. Well, with 5 of these, that's going to be 300 per assault phase on average. Chances are, if you can meet that pace, you'll probably end up having taken out 400 in one. That's just my guess, but whatever. And the cost to the Roman army is essentially measured in the victory points. The casualties generate victory points according to this chart. Notably, Titus is worth 200 because he is Vespasian's son and the most trusted leader present. Once Jerusalem's fall is inevitable, there's an attempt to escape possible. Once the Jerusalem replacement rate only hits 25% or less, you can make an escape attempt. And the infantry trying to escape, now this is beginning to sound like it happens in the midst of the battle again, can attempt to move from elevated hexes to adjacent ground hexes outside the city for 4 movement points, provided they begun the movement points in the elevated hex. I guess they're dropping rope ladders or something here. Roman cav and federati outside the city are freed from command control in order to attack Judeans outside the city, because it would be hard to catch them otherwise. The Romans may not unilaterally declare an assault period over if there are Judeans trying to escape that are outside the city or off board. The headquarters outside the city are off board. Any Judean unit which starts and ends its movement phase out of a Roman zone of control can move down slope hexes, I guess these guys, at a cost of only 1 movement point, rather than the 3 that the terrain effects table will give. To qualify for this special movement, the Judean unit must be moving directly towards the closest clear hex on the opposite direction of the crest. That implies that slopes all have a crest associated with them somewhere. The Judeans which move off the map score escape victory points equal to double their fresh printed melee strength. Okay, so here's how you get to your 1500 without doing 400 casualty hits, is that you can score significant points off your escape points conceivably. In addition, any leader exited earns a 100-point bonus. If Eliezer Ben Yahir leaves, he gets 250 points. His units will be out of the game, but now they're over in Masada and causing Rome further problems that they have to deal with. The Judeans will also get redoubt victory points at the end of the 5th assault phase. For each Judean fortress they have is 10, and if Eliezer Ben Yair is on the board, he's worth 50. It's better to get him off the board, but if you can't do that, if you can keep him alive, that's cool. And anyway, there's the mutiny of 400 casualty victory points in one assault phase. All right, need another break here for the assault period interphase. Now, why? This includes setup for the assault period, but the assault period interphase, here's where the difference is. But yeah, I need to rest a bit. The assault interphase, like I said, before each assault period, we go through the steps. First thing that's done is that the Romans decide how long they're going to wait. Now that ends up being modified, but they have a problem. If they go over 25 weeks for the whole game, the Judeans win. So they got to be somewhat careful. They get 5 assault periods. So you're looking at an average of 5 weeks each, but you may want to spend more time constructing and engineering works at certain points rather than others. If the Roman decides to wait at least 2 weeks before attacking, he can do mining. Now, there's a mining table over here, which we'll be referring to, I guess. The mining die roll will be modified by the die roll modifier up here. And you got to go pretty far to get a bonus on it. He rolls, if he gets a positive number, he gets that number of shafts up to a maximum of 4 to weaken or collapse the elevated hexes. He then rolls to determine the damage. So first he rolls to see how many hexes he gets, then he rolls to see what damage he's going to make. And he has a die roll modifier based on the number of hexes, I think. If the result's a positive number, that's the number of shafts. Okay, then he rolls to determine the damage for each shaft, eliminating any artillery placed in the collapsed hex. Now, earlier in the stages of the setup, the Jews have placed their artillery. They've plotted where it's going to be. They don't tell the Romans, but if a hex where artillery was placed is collapsed, the artillery is damaged by it. Destroyed, actually. And then any surviving artillery can be moved about to react to how the Romans set up. Now, if the Romans if they didn't get enough hits, enough shafts, they can postpone their attack if they got less than 4 on the preparation chart and make a new mining die roll with the new higher modifier. Now, he's going to lose the additional shaft. He's going to lose the shafts he's already built from that number. So he only gets additional shafts. So if he, say, got 3 on the first roll, if his second roll was a 6, he'd get 3 more shafts. What's not clear is whether the damage rating is going to be off this, and the fact that, the more shafts you get, the higher your damage die roll modifier is until you get to 4 and then it drops to 0 is just kind of weird. He may continue to postpone the assault until he gets a result with which he's willing to attack. However, postponing the assault not only increases the Judean victory points to the extent shown on the next progression point column, so the Judeans get points for however long you delay. Again, not counted towards that 400 you have to worry about. It's counted towards the 1500. It also gives the Judean an extra repair die roll for each additional week of delay following the completion of the first shaft, and an opportunity to reposition artillery on the because of the newly replaced shafts. Now, what's weird here is I'm not sure what's going on, because I kind of get an idea that the Romans get to roll again and see if they get more shafts, but each time they do, they give the Judeans more and more rolls on the repair die roll. Now, what's weird here as well is somewhere it uses, I seem to remember die and dice being used in a particular way. That may be over in the repair section itself. I gotta switch batteries. The question is the timing of all of this. Do you wait until all of your shafts are determined before you start rolling with a damage die roll? That's not made clear either. Having dug one or more complete shafts, the Romans must now decide the site of the shaft just prior to the start of the assault period. So yeah, I guess you wait. You don't know what the effect is of them. Each shaft dug during the current assault period must be within 11 hexes of a Roman headquarters. I guess you have to set up first? I don't know. Let's see our order here. So it looks like the shafts, I guess, get triggered. Yeah, the shafts get triggered back here. Setup is over here. So the Roman units won't be on the board when that happens. So that's kind of weird. Maybe it's Roman units left over, not allowed to move. Again, you know, they didn't do a great job on trying to clarify these rules. Maybe they figured nobody would play the campaign game. Certainly, Greenwood doesn't seem to support long, big games. Within his own, his own philosophy is not really in favor of giant games. So, like, he might have said, screw it, we don't have to worry about these rules. Make them as obfuscated as possible. So we'll try to figure out some way to make this work. But then the Romans make die rolls against the undermined hex to determine how much damage is done. Now, here's where it is. The Roman makes a dice roll, 2 dice, for each undermined hex to determine the extent of the damage. A dice roll greater than the breach defense of the hex results in a breach in that hex. Those that do not collapse are marked by a damage marker equal to the damage dice roll to reflect, marked by equal to the damage dice roll to reflect their weakened status. An already breached hex cannot be damaged further, but still counts as one of the hexes affected by an engineering die roll. Okay, great. Somewhere. Okay. So now, Romans get their replacement percentage, which we discussed earlier. They can choose to try to build a ramp. The armored towers, they can make a construction die roll per assault period to build armored towers and add them to their forces. He makes this die roll after announcing the week of his assault. Let's see, armored towers. He has to get greater than a 7 or 12, and he gets a die roll modifier. Now, it looks to me like he only gets a single die. He makes this die roll after announcing the week of his assault and foregoing any delays. I don't know what the foregoing means. Does that mean I don't get the bonus from the delays? I don't know what they mean there. If the construction die roll plus the indicated DRM is greater than 7, equal to, he may add 1 new armored tower. If it's greater than or equal to 12, he may add 2. Before making the construction die roll, the Roman player may specify that he wishes to substitute 3 new siege towers and or rams, only to replace earlier losses for an armored tower if his construction die roll is successful. Okay, Just prior to the opening of each assault phase except the first, and before the Roman setup, the Judean player is allowed to make a repaired dice roll, 2 dice. The result is the total number of previous damage points he can remove from the elevated hex under his control. He cannot repair a breach nor an isolated fortress on a wall section that the Judeans do not control, nor can he repair more than half the damage to any one elevated hex. The repaired dice roll is subject to modifications based on the length of preparation. Great. If the Roman delays his assault after resolving a completed shaft's damage, which doesn't seem to be the case because the damage is resolved back here, so I think you actually resolve the damage before you do any of this setup shit, but who knows? Which is why my taking dice versus die is going to be funny here, but the Judean may make one additional repaired die roll, singular this time, for each week of the delay to determine, do they have that kind of subtlety? Maybe, but who knows if that's just a typo or whatever. To determine the number of damage points he may remove from controlled hexes, including those just damaged by any newly revealed shafts. The same repair restrictions apply, although a hex already repaired to its fullest extent, half its damage earlier, can repair another half due to each additional week of delay, which makes it sound like we do each of these weeks singularly. But again, that's not obvious from the description anywhere else, and it starts getting really weird. Okay. In addition to the clearance of built-up hexes inside newly controlled areas, the Romans may breach 1 elevated hex per week between assault periods along any wall they control. But remember, they only control walls that are between 2 areas that they control. So they can blast holes through it to make it easier to traverse, but it's probably not that big a deal. The hex breach may not be within 2 hexes of a Judean-controlled elevated hex, including bypassed forts. And that's the end of that. I'm not going to actually start today. I think I'll start tomorrow morning. And starting includes trying to parse together this. The Judean calculates his replacements and reinforcements. The Roman declares whether he's building a ramp. Still hasn't decided how long he's going, right? The Judean but he does declare where it'll be placed. The Judean secretly records his artillery. He places a unit of each type in each bypassed fortress he still controls and wishes to occupy. And he can add other units if he wishes when the Judeans set up their remaining forces. The Roman announces, and that's important because if he controls fortress, I think what's happening here is the units aren't being removed from the map after the assault. And that's going to determine where you can make the attacks. The Roman announces the number of weeks he's taking. Okay, so he could declare he's building the ramp and not be able to do it, and then he's screwed out of his one chance. The Judean makes his repair die roll and carries out repairs for that time period. The Roman then makes required die rolls on the preparation chart. If he decides to make the assault, he collects his replacements. If he decides to postpone, the Judean may roll for additional repairs to any elevated hexes and change the secret location of artillery. I assume that's repeatable. The Romans then set up first off-board or outside the city, no closer than 5 hexes from a Judean wall. In all assault periods after the first, they can also set up in Roman-controlled city sections. Units outside the city must be at least 5 hexes away from the Judean elevated hexes. After the Romans set up, then the Judeans place their artillery where they listed them, and then they place the Judean units on the board, and then the Judeans will get a free fire phase, and then we start with a Roman rally phase, which I believe is the first step in any turn, and all the Romans are already rallied, so that's not a big deal. I think it makes some sense. I think it can be parsed together in a way that is sensible, but there are a lot of rules questions in this section of the game. There are a few in the others, but this section is just so muddied and so poorly explained that it just isn't sinking into me. And it's also sort of the least intuitive in and of itself, because the other sections you're handling movement and combat in a tactical situation, you can use some common sense to figure out how things will work. But common sense doesn't really determine whether or not this should be one die or two, when no matter how you do things, you're going to get results that aren't equivalent to the results you would have gotten if the Romans chose to just run that many weeks on their own. And that's disturbing to me. However, there's no way around it because, see, what I think should happen, although this could cause unfair advantages to the Romans, is that the Jews should get repair die rolls based on the number of weeks in little impulses. So if you say the Romans are going to delay 2 more weeks, but that doesn't really correlate because the Romans also don't operate in that sort of cumulative fashion that would make sense. So, unless you really twisted the rules completely out of the shape that they're in, you couldn't get to that. And twisting the rules out of the shape they're in doesn't make sense because there's such a mining die roll penalty to going such a short time that it doesn't really work that way either. However, there is a certain cumulative buildup in it, in that if I was rolling on the -2 modifier and ended up getting 2 mining operations, well, next time rolling on the -1 kind of makes some sense, in that I'm going to subtract those 2 that I already got from the total that I get. Whereas if the Jews are doing a repair die roll modifier over here, well, where I was at -2, they'd get a -1 to their die roll. They'd roll 2 dice at -1. They'd get maybe, say they roll a 7, they'd get 6 repair points. Next time, they'd be rolling with a 0 modifier, which, if they're rolling 2 dice, they're going to average another 7 repair points for that 1 week, whereas that 1 week should only get them about 2. Now, if they're only rolling 1 die for this, though, for each additional week, weird things start happening. It comes up a totally different value. Anyway, I'll try to muddle through as best as I can. I think the Romans probably don't want to extend the interphase just because it looks like it's really to their disadvantage, unless they have, no breaches and they really feel like they need them. All right, let's send this sucker up, and as I said, I'm combining it with the other one. It ends up being about an hour and a half instead of just an hour.